Om Amriteshwariyai Namaha. My humble pranams at the lotus feet of Amma, Sadguru Shri Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, the embodiment of love and compassion, insight and inspiration, wisdom and action, laughter and light. In our live Q&A session, we have with us Brahmachari Mokshamrita Ji. Let me introduce Namaskaram Swami. Let me introduce him to you. Brahmachari Mokshamrita Chaitanya is a disciple of the world-renowned humanitarian and spiritual leader Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, also known as Amma. He is a youth mentor, a prolific speaker, and conducts several motivational workshops for the youth across India. He was also an invited speaker at TEDx. A computer science engineer by background, he has authored several research papers as well. Mokshamrita Ji is also the national coordinator of Ayudh India. Ayudh is an international youth movement inspired by Amma's vision of compassionate leadership. So welcome Swamiji. Before we begin the questions, would you like to have an opening remarks towards our audience, Swami, and the team?
Sure. First of all, I would like to congratulate the MAUM team for having started this wonderful initiative of Mastery Over Mind course. In fact, I remember Amma has always been emphasizing on two aspects of education. One being education for living and other being education for life. Education for living is something that we usually get in colleges, universities, but education for life is something that is missing in today's world, and that is where this course or courses similar to this can help bridge that gap. So once again, I congratulate entire MAUM team, and I also hope that today this question and answer session can help those who have asked the questions and also the listeners who are attending this course. I hope that this will be useful.
Okay, let's begin our first question. This is asked by Sophie Dinesh. Om Namah Shivaya. According to the revered Swamiji, desires are the root cause of mental disturbances. I have read in scriptures that even the great rishis were not free from desires. How can then lesser mortals like me get rid of these desires? Is it even possible to get rid of them completely? Thank you.
Sophie Dinesh, that's the name?
That's the name.
So, Sophie, first thing which I would like to say is, I think you should not think you are a mortal, first of all. Even though we use these terms like a lesser mortal like me, our scriptures declare that you are an immortal self, Amritasya Putraha. So let us get rid of that misconception first. You talked about rishis having desires. I think it's a very general statement. I don't think we can just say it so casually. We must remember that rishis are of different types at different levels, and every rishi has been a work in progress. Every spiritual aspirant in one way is a rishi. But when we talk about rishis, if you look at our scriptures also, there is Rishi Yajnavalkya, there is Narada Maharishi, there is Ramana Maharishi, and there is Patanjali Maharishi. There are so many rishis who have been able to control their desires. So if you just talk about one or two and then generalize the statement, I don't think it's right. There have been rishis who have had complete mastery over mind, and even in today's modern world, people like Amma, Mahatmas like Amma, they're an example of that. So now coming to your question about desires, it's not that desires are harmful in general. Somebody can have a very simple desire, let us say to do something, some good to the society. It's a very good desire. So desire has to be weighed in properly in a particular context. Let's say if you are an Olympic runner and you have your final Olympics sprint in few days, then you will do everything possible to ensure that you are not taking pizza or ice cream even though you may like it. So having the right set of desires is very important according to the situation in which you are. So we cannot generalize and say all desires are bad or all desires are wrong. It also depends on the context. Now Sophie had asked about how do we control desires. I think again what is very important here is to understand not just the context of the desire but the very nature of the desire. That very nature of the desire has to be understood. Amma often gives example of a dog who's chewing on a bone, and when it chews on the bone, the sharp edges of the bone bleed the gums of the dog, and the blood that is oozing out of his own gums, dog's own gums, he starts tasting that and he starts to believe that this blood is coming from the bone, but actually it is coming from its own gums. So similarly, the problem with the desires is that we start to project that happiness on an external object or an external person. This projection is what creates a problem. The problem is not with the desire as such, but our deep rooted misconception that happiness is out there somewhere, or in some person, or in some object, or in some situation. That is what creates a problem. And just like the example of this dog, right? Now what is the problem is that every desire which pulls us away from our inherent nature, it creates a disturbance in our mind. Actually, the happiness is our true nature. That is what scriptures declare. Happiness is our true nature. But then when we start believing and when we start running after the pleasures or happiness, so-called happiness, when we start running after the external objects, that is where that pull gets created in us. That stress starts to build up. Because no matter how many objects you acquire, no matter what you do in the external world, you will never get that ultimate happiness, right? And that tension which is always there to trying to get happiness but not getting it, that is what leads to suffering and misery. So every disturbance, you can think of it like that. Let me give an example. The disturbance of mind is like fire, right? And every desire you have fuels that fire. Every desire you have fuels that fire. Now, Krishna in Bhagavad Gita gives a very beautiful life cycle of desire in just 2 compact verses. Krishna says, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsaha Sangasteshu Pujayate Sangat Sanjayate Kama Kamat Krodho Vijayate. And then he continues, Krodat Bhavati Sammoha Sammohat Smriti Vibhrama Smriti Bhramshat Buddhinashat Pranashyati. So that whole life cycle is such beautifully drawn by Krishna, and just before you get to the step of kama, which is the desire, you see there are 2 other things. Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsa is one, and Sangasteshu Pujayate and Sangat Sanjayate Kama. So there is dwelling on the external objects or situations or people, and then there is attachment to those, and then comes the desire, right? So to be able to really control desire or give it a right direction, I would say, it also means that you are not dwelling on the things which you should not be dwelling on, and then you are not having unintelligent attachments to them. That is the whole life cycle of it. And if you want to overcome desires, you have to kind of trace it back and then work on those 2 things, right? So if you want to get rid of, let's say, the first thing, dhyato, it all starts with attention on a particular object and having that misconception or a deep rooted belief that this is what will give me happiness. Now what happens is, that's step number one, because Sophie is asking about how to control desires, how can a lesser mortal like me can, of course you can. So the first thing is to take care of not dwelling on the objects or people or situations which you should not be. That is the first thing. See, I'll give you an example. For example, in television, even on YouTube nowadays, they show you advertisements. So what is an advertisement basically? They are injecting a particular thought or a concept in your mind, right? And they're trying to attract your attention. That is the first thing. They're trying to attract your attention, and they will do everything possible to attract your attention. You may have, the product could be something like a biscuit, but it may have nothing to do with biscuit, but you have people and situations, and the background will be so attractive that you will somehow get glued to that ad, right? Or maybe even the background music or something will be very attractive. In fact, the word advert in the advertisement and divert, the other word, the root word is vertier. That's a Latin root word which means to turn attention or to attract attention. So every advertisement is basically trying to get your attention, and once you give your attention, you cannot help but get attached to it, and that is the breeding ground of the desires, right? So the first way or the first method to get rid of unintelligent desires, not all desires, you don't have to get rid of all desires, there are some desires which are harmless. The first way is to keep your senses under control, which means your five senses, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, and of course your mind also, not dwelling on those things which you should not be dwelling, right? And in fact, in Kathopanishad, and I'm sure you know that Bhagavad Gita draws heavily from some of the examples from Kathopanishad, which is a dialogue between Lord of Death, Yama, and Nachiketa. And Lord Yama says very, very clearly that you can imagine, he gives a simile, a metaphor, that you consider as if you are the charioteer and your body is the chariot and your senses are the horses, your mind is the reins and your buddhi or the intellect is the driver, right? And if you have that firm intellect, if you have intelligence in place, not a wavering intellect, you will be able to maneuver your life in the right direction. And every object, every situation are the paths of those horses, the senses and the mind. So that is first way, to have the control over our senses and the mind, because that is where once you give your attention, the attachment will develop, you can't help it. The second thing is, when you come to the next level, now for whatever reason you have already paid your attention and you have gotten attached to some object or some people or some situation. Now the next thing to do would be to become free of that attachment. So attachment, this is Sangha. So to become Nissanga. And the antidote to the Sangha is Satsanga. And that is why we have this Sanskrit word Satsangatve Nissangatvam. Nissangatve Nirmohatvam. So with the Satsanga, which is association of the Mahatmas, association of good books, association of spiritual books like Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads. So they help you to get over those attachments, Nirmohatvam, to get over that false beliefs, misconceptions. So that is second step. In case you have gotten attached, you can use Satsanga as the antidote to get over the unintelligent attachments. Third, there is another one which you can, which is very useful actually, because as Sophie also mentioned, even rishis were not free of desires. Yes, I do agree to that to some extent, because every rishi, including Amma, they keep a desire for the welfare of the people, for the welfare of the society, and it's a harmless desire. So one way to get rid of your unintelligent, selfish desires is to try to have more desires which will help others. You become selfless in that way. Selfless desires by having more and more selfless desires. Actually, that gives you more happiness. In positive psychology, they call about PERMA: pleasure, engagement, relationships, meanings. So that is where meanings come into play. When you have a higher meaning in life, you have higher desires in life, it helps you to get over the lower desires. So that is third way, to have desires which are for the larger good. In fact, Swami Vivekananda used to say many times, Atmano mokshartham jagat hitaya cha. Every spiritual aspirant, not just for his own welfare, but for the good of the entire society, entire mankind, he or she must put all the efforts for that. So I think these three ways: control of the senses, first, so that you don't give your attention to each and everything. In case you have given attention and you have developed an attachment, then satsanga. And then third is having desires which are for the benefit of the people, selfless desires, not selfish desires. I think these three can really help.
Thank you. That was useful. So basically, to have a discriminative intellect in each step.
Absolutely, absolutely.